Hey everybody, welcome back to the Music History Project. Today's episode is all about surf music. Welcome to the Music History Project. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth Dale.
And Dan Del Fiorentino.
And Mike Mullins.
All of our content comes from the Oral History Program, which is sponsored by NAMM, the National Association of Music Merchants. And that is a program that is over 3,000 interviews and constantly growing. If you want to check out any of our content or any of the other interviews that aren't featured, please check out our website at www.namm.org/library. All right, guys, we're so glad to have you back with us today. We're going to be discussing surf music in honor of International Surf Music Month. So we're very excited.
Yay.
That was a very enthusiastic
Did you like that? Well, I was hoping Mike was going to chime in with his.
I mean, I was excited, but I just wasn't as excited as you, I guess.
You were internally excited.
I was internally excited.
Mine came out as a yay. Yay. And it's cool because we have assembled some audio clips from interviews from the Oral History Program here at NAMM of those who talk about it, those who are legends within the surf music movement, and people who are been influenced by it. So it's exciting to have this opportunity to talk about this great genre that basically started in Southern California in the early 1960s, and came with it some heroes and legends, including Dick Dale, probably best known as the king of the surf guitar. We did have an interview with him that we're going to play a little bit later on, along with some folks who have had bands not only here in California, but around the world playing surf music. So it'll be fun to hear their perspective as well.
If you're not too familiar with surf music, or you think you aren't, because that's really what it is, you think you're not familiar, chances are you've actually heard a lot of surf music throughout your life because it's been featured in tons of movies and other instrumental hits, as well as some iconic bands that we're going to hear from some members of, which is really exciting. So don't, if you were thinking about turning this podcast off, skipping forward, don't, because you actually know more than you probably think you do. So, but we're excited to teach you a little bit more and feature some of the big names in surf music. Who are we going to start with first, Mike?
So first up, we have Paul Johnston talking about the identity of surf music. Here's Paul.
Surf music is identified now with that reverb sound because the biggest hits did have that reverb sound to them. But it was actually being called surf music prior to the reverb even coming out, like Dick Dale's Let's Go Trippin', which, along with Mr. Moto, there's a question as to which is technically the first surf record, because his record hit the charts first, but we had actually recorded Mr. Moto 3 or 4 months before he recorded Let's Go Trippin'. But those were the first two records that were kind of acknowledged as surf music. And that's because the surfers were going to the dances, his dances in the summer of '61 in the Rendezvous Ballroom in Orange County, and the Bel Airs were throwing dances in the South Bay. And I remember the surfers coming to the dances and basically calling it surf music. This was before there was reverb. And I think the important point for the record is that it was really the surfers who made that identification. We were just playing, as far as we were concerned, we were just playing our instrumental favorites from the Fireballs and you know, Link Ray and Johnny and the Hurricanes and Dwayne Eddy, and then the Ventures came along, and that was, you know, that was important too. But
so does it have to sound a certain way to be considered surf music?
Well, the thing is, at first, but what it was is we were playing the stuff. I'd say the closest to surf music before surf music would have been the Fireballs, because you had George Tomsco with the Fireballs was doing dual guitar stuff. Then the Ventures came along, and actually after the Fireballs had kind of pioneered that dual guitar sound, the Ventures came along, and with Walk Don't Run, they suddenly kind of took the spotlight away from the Fireballs, and they became the band that was best known for that ensemble sort of approach. I'm trying to get at the question of what distinguishes the sound. And the fact of the matter is that the distinguishing sound of surf music kind of came after the fact. Because what happened was we were playing this music, which we learned from these other bands. And as far as we were concerned, we were just playing in the style of the Ventures and these other bands, and we're playing at these dances, and the surfers come to the dances. And I remember distinctly the first night I ever heard the term was one of the local surfers, and I think it was Lance Carson. He was like if I remember correctly, it was Lance, who came up and he said, "Wow, man, your music sounds just like it feels out there on a wave. You ought to call it surf music." Because see, what we did was like in the summer of '61, we threw these dances, and we just happened to be playing around the beach, and so it happened to be the surfers who were coming to the dances. So we had no preconceived idea that we were playing, quote, surf music. We were just playing, and it really was just our take on these other bands, but they started calling it surf music. And the same thing was happening down in Newport Beach with Dick Dale. And the surfers were going down there, and the same thing was happening. And I remember going down there to hear him play, too. And there was in the beginning, up through until that summer, there was no self-conscious pandering to the surfers. It wasn't like there was no songs with surf titles or anything like that. But the surfers started calling it surf music, and by the end of the summer, that's what it was. It was surf music. It wasn't until the next year that Fender invented the reverb. And so that's, like I say, our Dick Dale and the Bel Airs each recorded our records that became hits during this early period before it was even called surf music. But by the time the summer was over and those records came out and went on the charts, they were being called surf music, and we were being called surf bands. Then all of a sudden you had all these other bands who were coming around and going, "Wow, this is cool. This is a whole new deal. Let's jump on it."
So somebody else called you a surf band before you did.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
In fact, I remember thinking that this was kind of a strange, kooky idea, that I didn't really identify with it that much myself. Although, once it caught on, that's what it was. It was being called surf music. But the original surf musicians were not surfers necessarily. They may or may not have been surfers. But in our case, like at the time, I think, we weren't really avid surfers. We hung around the beach, and we were part of the beach culture. But the surfers, that was not a big deal to them, because they just liked the music. And in fact, I think they even kind of admired and appreciated the fact that we weren't pandering to them, because about the same time the Beach Boys came along, in early '62, their record came out. Surfin' was their first record that was on the radio. And I remember the surfers around the beach going, "Who are these Grimmies? And what is this all about? What does this have to do with it?" Because it wasn't the instrument. It was the instrumentals that they were calling surf music, and this vocal thing about surfing seemed to be kind of one step removed, and seemed like these were outsiders who were trying to kind of jump on the trend, and because it was like by this time the whole surf movement was exploding. It was a big trend, and it just sort of seemed to the surfers. In fact, I remember there were some surfers down there on the beach, and when they started, the Beach Boys came out. I remember these guys saying, "Who are these guys? Let's go beat them up," because they thought they were perceived as kind of candy coating the whole deal, And then, so they had 2 or 3 records that were about surfing. And then they went on to singing, fun, cruising songs about cars and girls and stuff. And once they started doing that, they were embraced by everyone, including the surfers, because then they were being authentic. Whereas when there was always that sense that when they were singing about surfing, it wasn't quite authentic. Which is ironic, because the instrumental bands, the ones who were playing what they were calling real surf music, were not even necessarily surfers. But we were being authentic because we were just playing the music, and the surfers were the ones who were making the identification. And as a matter of fact, if in the beginning when the musicians started getting self-conscious about it and started trying to, be like surfers and everything, it had some of that same connotation of, well, it was kind of like playing a game here, and come on, just make the music.
So that was Paul giving us a background about the identity of surf music and what makes up the foundations of surf music. And if you've never heard Paul Johnston's name before, we're going to have Dan give us a little bit of his bio.
Well, the neat thing about Paul is he basically, in my estimation, sort of single-handedly kept the surf guitar sound alive throughout some of the times where it was more dormant, like the 70s and 80s. It became much more popular in the 90s, and a lot of that has to do with the festivals and collector programs that were put together and hosted by Paul, who gets a lot of kudos in my book for keeping that alive and bringing together people like Gil Orr, who was also part of a program here at the NAMM building in the Museum of Making Music in early 2000s about surf music. And Paul really did a great job putting that together as well. So we'll be hearing from Paul a little bit later on. But first up, I think we're going to hear from the King.
Well, we thought a perfect introduction to have us kind of learn about the king of surf guitar would be to have some of the other icons of surf music give us his background, give us his bio. So instead of us giving you all of the important names and dates and facts about Dick Dale, we thought who better to do it than some other people in surf music. So first we're going to hear from Bruce Johnston, who is of the Beach Boys.
Right, one of the great singers of the Beach Boys and been with the Beach Boys for over 50 years.
So here's his take on Dick Dale.
Before Dick Dale was a surf guy, he was kind of an Elvis guy. And Dick Dale, we played one time. We got to back up. Shit, I'll think of it in a second. But I was still, one more summer, I had 2 more summers of this. And Dick Dale opened, and Dwayne Eddy was the star, right? But Dick Dale's darling father, what a guy. He had his little ASCAP pin on, a suit, and he'd be in the audience, and Dick would be doing his singing, and he'd say, "Dick, play your trumpet. Play your trumpet." And there I am watching Dick do his thing. Then they had the flamenco, so I'm doing I Only Have Eyes for You and playing the It was really mind-blowing before they invented that word for a little guy in high school. It was really cool. Great times. I wouldn't trade them for anything.
That was Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys talking about the icon that is Dick Dale. And we're going to hear a little bit more before we get into talking about before we hear from Dick Dale himself. So to give another little introduction about the king of surf guitar is Paul Johnston again.
He was already, I would say that he was much bigger in the beginning than the Bel Airs, well, all the way through. He really deserves the title king. The Bel Air, we were just kids and pretty, pretty fresh and new at it, while he was already a seasoned player, had a very powerful band with a lot of big equipment, and they had a massive sound. And frankly, the Bel Airs during that summer, we were just kids with small amps, and our sound was a lot more naive and simple. He was much more sophisticated by that point, so it's like, and then I remember going to see him play and being, blown away because it was so powerful. And, within the next year or so, we were stepping up to that level where we got bigger amps and we got a little more energetic and everything. But Dick Dale was definitely the pioneer of that big, powerful surf sound.
So once again, that was Paul Johnston, and before him, Bruce Johnston, talking about Dick Dale and leading us into the king himself. So coming up next, we're going to hear from Dick Dale, and he's going to be talking about his first guitar and learning how to play.
I read a Superman magazine, and it said, sell so many jars of Noxzema, and you can get this ukulele with a cowboy on it. And I wanted to be a cowboy singer, so I listened to Hank Williams, And so I went out and sold Noxzema skin cream in the snow at night, banging on the doors, and they go, Dickie, why aren't you in bed? It's school tomorrow. Buy my skin cream. I'm still shaving with Noxzema. And then what happened was I waited about 4 months after I sent the money, and I never got it. And I finally got it. And when I got it, it was this compressed sawdust cardboard, and the pegs would just fall out of the holes. And, I mean, I was so discouraged. I painted green, the cowboy on it. Yeah, he had a lariat and a horse. So I finally got my little red wagon there, my rider, and I went down to the store, cashed in all these little Pepsi-Cola bottles I could find. And I got about $6, so for $5.95, I bought a plastic ukulele, cream on top and brown on the sides. Got a little chord maker that you'd strap on, you push it down and give you the key of C. Well, that didn't work because the strings rattled. So I got a book, and it says, put your finger here, and like that, put your fingers here. But I couldn't understand why my fingers wouldn't go there. Because the book didn't say, turn it the other way, stupid, you're left-handed. Because I had all the rhythm on the canisters playing to the Harry James records was in my left hand, being left-handed. Then I decided that that's where I wanted to get my pick. So, I was playing like drums, like dun dun da da dun dun da, instead of the old country like that. I was creating. I called it rockabilly, and that term wasn't even used then because I was rocking a song, the Tennessee Waltz, and I'd be doing all these rhythms. Well, I'd go to bed at night and I'd tape my fingers like that. The light didn't come on and say, it's designed for a right-handed player. I just kept stretching my fingers and finally played 3 chords. And I went like that. It goes, that was the C, or the G, that's C, and that's D, I guess, and then back to G. Well, then one day, so I started to play about 4 or 5 country tunes, and I'm playing on this ukulele and doing all this going that kind of a rhythm. Then I went out to the farm, and with my buddy Lester, we were picking some swamp berries, blueberries. My grandma would make the old blueberry turnovers, and you can ask me what time it is. I'll tell you how to build a clock. That's just basically the way it goes. So I don't want somebody to assume something. What did you do yesterday? I went to the store. Well, why don't you tell them you got held up? But the thing is we were walking out there and we heard this sound, and everybody was like, I'm hearing this drum, and I'm going, this is like Deliverance, man. Where we were, we're in the swamps, and I said, should we go there? Will they kill us or what? Well, anyway, we walked in, 2 young little kids. And these guys, was about 10 guys, all sitting there strumming, and they had a tooth here in one ear and a cigarette rolled up in here. I got the blues, oh Lord, since my baby said, the real old country singing. So I said, wow, look at them guitars. They're real guitars. And I goes, I'd give anything for a guitar. Well, I got one for sale. Really? How much? It's $8, $8. $8 was all the money in the world to me. And so I turned around and said, will you take payments? And he goes, you take 25 cents down? No, 50 cents. All right. Give him 50 cents. Can I make 25-cent payments? No, 50-cent payments. Oh, God. Well, I tried to run out in the last payment, and he caught me on the street, and he hugged me upside down and took it out of my pants. Anyway, I'm holding this guitar now. I got this big guitar with a big hole in the middle. Wow. It's got 6 strings, though. What am I going to do? And he goes, well, just play the ukulele chords. Just hit those. But if I did that, it would sound like this. That don't make sense. And then my C chord would have sounded like this. And then the D chord would have gone like this. See, it doesn't match. He goes, just don't play the other 2. Just muffle them. So I used to go like this. I only strum these. I go like this. I was waltzing with my darling to the Tennessee Waltz when an old friend I happened to see Nobody knew I couldn't play the other two strings. So I fooled them for years and years, just playing on my little old 4-stringers and doing that.
That was Dick Dale talking about getting into guitar, learning how to play, which is really cool. I mean, the fact that Dan was able to capture an interview with Dick Dale to sit down with him is pretty amazing. I mean, sitting down to do the prep for work for this podcast, again, being kind of like the novice of the group in terms of musicians and music products, I had heard his name, but I didn't know much about him. And when Mike was telling me, oh yeah, he played, this track or that track, I was just like, yeah, don't mean nothing to me. But as soon as the first couple notes came out of my speakers when we looked him up, just because Mike was adamant that I knew who it was, I was like, oh yeah.
And I feel like that's how it is with a lot of surf music. You've heard the track, but since they're mostly instrumentals, you don't all the time hear the names or hear the people behind the tracks. So you know the song, you just don't know who wrote it or where it came from.
Right. And it was like, what is it, Miserlou? Did I say it right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As soon as it played, I was like, oh, Pulp Fiction. Like, that's how I knew it. And then, just kind of was like, oh, I know more than I thought I did. And that's always exciting.
Well, the same is true for the next guy, Will Glover. He had a band called The Pyramids, and in 1963 had a big hit called Penetration that by name I don't think most people know. I was along with you guys. When I heard it, I'm like, oh yeah, that song. And what's really cool about this is Will is the only surf guitarist that I've interviewed so far who's also African American, and because of that, he was able to bring surf music to a wider audience, and a role he was very proud of. And so here's a segment from his interview.
My Uncle Joe gave me this guitar. It was a beat-up K guitar, and strung totally upside down, and I taught myself how to play. Except every now and then I would run into somebody who knew how to play, and they would show me a few chords. So as time went on, I got a little better, and then I moved to the Naval Project. I didn't move. My dad was in the Navy. We ended up in the Naval Project, and in the Naval Project, there's all kinds of races, all races that all over the world. Everybody was there. It's just amazing. And the Guamanians, Hawaiians, and Samoans, and everybody played guitar, ukulele, or whatever. And so I'd get out there with my guitar by myself, and they'd say, hey, come over here, come play with us. And I'd say, oh, I can't play with these guys. They know how to play. But what would happen is they would show me their different styles of rhythm, and the different ways that they would play. And it became such an education just learning those things and the way they would sing along with the instrument that they played. And it helped me so much to just not just to be a rock and roll player, but to be able to play like they play on the islands and everything. And it was great. And so it was good that happened to me.
Okay, that was Will Glover. Awesome guy, as you can tell, very passionate about music making, and it was a real thrill to hang out with him. Just another shout out for all those wondering where all these interview clips are coming from. This is all based on the NAMM Oral History program. And Elizabeth, where can they find clips?
Oh, my favorite part of the podcast. You can find our whole collection at www.namm.org. That's NAMM.org/library.
So as we're talking about surf music, I thought we'd take just a quick second to give a shout out to some of those musicians who were the pioneers, not necessarily playing surf music themselves, but certainly a huge influence on the generation that came after them, including Dick Dale and Will Glover, Paul Johnston, who we've all heard previously and will be hearing from again, and others. And the first guy that comes to mind is Link Wray, who really is given credit for creating the power chord, which, of course, surf music would not be the same without. The Ventures, including that great guitar by Noki Edwards, also cited often as an influence. And then this next gentleman who, along with his high school mates, started a band called the Fireballs. Mike, tell us about our next interviewee.
Well, our next interviewee is George Tomsco, and as Dan said, he played with the Fireballs, and he's going to be talking about his switch over to the guitar after learning an instrument previously.
When I was, 9 years old, is in the 5th grade, and we had a mini assembly. 2 brothers. First time I had seen an electric guitar and an electric amplifier. 2 brothers called the Amadeo brothers did a little mini concert for us, and they played Guitar Boogie Shuffle and another song. But as soon as I heard Guitar Boogie Shuffle, one of them played lead, one of them played rhythm, I was hooked, and I went home that night and said, Mom, I want a guitar, so they wound up getting me one for Christmas or birthday or something. Yeah, it was a catalog guitar. But that was the start for me.
That was George talking about learning guitar, switching over to the guitar. And we're going to round out this segment about these musicians getting their start in music and their first instruments, hearing from Bob Berryhill. And I got to say, as the person who sits in this office and screens all these interviews and kind of puts together our outline for this podcast, along with some other projects where I listen to full content of interviews, Bob's was really exciting because he brought his guitar with him. And he played a lot during it. So it kind of broke up when, 8 hours a day is listening to people talk and give us their story. They're all dynamic, but, you kind of hit that funk. So it's always exciting when people bring their instrument to sit down with Dan and incorporate music into their oral history interview. So if you're on the list to get interviewed and Dan calls you and you play an instrument, just bring that gigantic church organ with you somehow because I'll like it better on the back end. No, I'm just kidding. Bob is going to be talking to us about how he first got his start in music.
What's really cool about Bob is his passion. We talked earlier about Paul Johnston being the guy who sort of single-handedly kept surf music in the forefront, but I have to pause and also make sure that Bob Berryhill gets a little shout out for that as well. As a member of the Safaris, he had a couple of big hits in the 60s, including Surfer Joe, one of my favorites, and of course the all-time classic Wipeout. So here's a few words from Bob.
Basically, what got me started when I was 13 years old, I went to Hawaii with my parents on vacation, and we went to a hula show where they had professional ukulele players and singers and dancers, and a gentleman came out in the middle of the show and played just a great ukulele. It is kind of just beautiful music, melody and everything. And I looked up to him and I said to my dad, I want to do that. So the next morning I came down out of the Kaiser Hawaiian Village down in the lobby, and I saw this gentleman walking across the foyer, and I ran up to him like a little 13-year-old would and said, I need a ukulele. Can you pick one out for me? And so we went downtown to the ukulele shop, and he got a couple off the wall and played them for me and said, yeah, this is a good one for a kid. Got me a booklet and showed me a few pointers and set me off on my way. And so when I was 13, I came back on the SS Lurleen, which was a cruise ship coming from Honolulu to Los Angeles. And I sat in the lobby playing ukulele with a little hat out in front, and people would throw pennies in there, and I had enough to make candy money all the way back. It wasn't anything like Disneyland today where you've got all those great things. I mean, I went outside to play shuffleboard and hit the shuffleboard and it flew off because the wind was so loud, so hard that it blew the shuttle thing off the boat. So I said, you know what, that's probably not what I'll do the rest of the day. So I hung around, but anyway, came back home and went up to Glendora Music and said, I want to learn how to play ukulele. I said, well, we don't have anybody that can teach you ukulele, but I have a lady that can teach you guitar. So I said, well, I've got a guitar. I said, it's got 6 strings, 4 strings, what's the difference? Went back and I spent about a year there with Linda, my guitar teacher, and she had different recitals and so forth, and I started doing pretty good. It was kind of like I was picking it up really fast, and started doing things. In fact, my first song was Bulldog. first time I heard that, I said, I want to do that too. So she played that song for me and said, let's play it. So I kept working till I could figure that out. And then Bulldog, Ramrod, turned into the next Tequila, and I was learning all the instrumental songs of the day. So I was sold on instrumental music.
All right, that was Bob Berryhill, and that rounds out our topic about hearing these guys getting started in music. And we're going to kind of shift gears. What's our next topic, Mike?
Our next topic is recordings.
Well, you were a lot more prepared than I thought you were.
I
was. Trying to, pull a fast one on you.
I know where we're going.
So we're going to be hearing from the same group of guys talking about some of their favorite or biggest recordings and the first guy we're going to hear from is Will Glover. So as Dan mentioned, he was with a band called The Pyramids, and he's going to be talking about the first recording experience he had with The Pyramids out in Long Beach, I believe, is where the studio was.
Now, it's not a long story, but it's this is how The Pyramids started. Okay, basically, I was a surfer and hung out with a lot of surfers, okay, because of the west side where I lived in Long Beach. And I'd go down there and I'd take my guitar to school. That was the first thing, which was kind of odd back in that time period. Nobody took their guitar to school. They took their trumpet, but they didn't take their guitar. I took my guitar to school, and I would get out there by this one tree, and I would just practice. And by this time, I had decided to learn how to play with the correct way of stringing the guitar, because I would try to do the Johnny Mathis songs. They got all those minor ninths, and it's just hard to make those minor ninths. Of course, like that, I'd have to think so far ahead so that I could get to it so I could make the chord like this. It was weird. So I started all over again, once again, in the Naval Project, and taught myself how to play again, the correct way. And so I would take my guitar to school, and I would play. Then I'd go to football practice. And then I would go out there by that tree, and I'd practice. And then I would go to some class. And Skip came by one day, and he says, hey, what are you doing playing the guitar out here? I said, well, it's what I do. I mean, you're a gymnastics guy, but this is what I do. So then the next time he says, hey, would you teach me how to play guitar? I said, well, I'll show you what I know. So it was raining like mad one night, and there's this knock on my door, and it was Skip and his dad. And my mom said, well, who are these? I said, well, Skip from school. And it was like 9 o'clock. But she let me go with them, which was interesting in itself. So we went over there and we started practicing, and I showed him a few things, and then he just took off. Skip became really good on guitar, playing lead. And then he says, why don't we start a band? I said, well, I always wanted to be a single artist. And I said, well, okay, maybe, And then it happened all of a sudden. He starts getting these guys, and the band gets formed. Now we have to go back to the surf deal. I used to take my guitar also to Linden Beach and play my guitar out there on Sundays. I'd go out there. It was like religion. I'd go out there on Sundays and play my guitar. And you would see that there was like this V, and there was this trash can where I would sit out there by this one trash can, play my guitar, and you would see this V of people, how they would start at the V right there. They would have their blankets and everything around this little kid out there playing his guitar. How good I was, I don't know, but they would come. Anyway, and this friend of mine came up who was a surfer, and he said, Will, I'm going to make you a star. I said, well, thank you very much. Well, this guy was so poor, it was kind of like a joke when he said it. 2 weeks later, there we are. You asked the question, how did your recording start? It started with him. He somehow came up with the money, and we recorded, I forgot the name of the place, but it's in Long Beach, and we did Pyramid Stomp. That was the first song we did. And Pyramid Stomp, of course, it didn't do anything, but it was recorded, and bam, that was beginning. And then from there, believe it or not, we did Here Comes Marcia and Penetration. Here we are in high school, and we got a hit record. It was amazing. And our parents, they were amazing. I don't understand to this day how they could not know that something was happening with their kids. Because if I was to turn TV on and see my kid on American Bandstand, I would say, wow, I think there's some money to be made here. You have to be making money, son. And I would have investigated more. But none of our parents. They just thought it was a nice hobby, So, anyway.
So I really like how we have organized this. And when I say we, I mean Elizabeth. Good job with the outline. As we continue to celebrate Surf Music Month, talking about recordings of some of the folks that we've interviewed. That was Will Glover talking about the pyramids. Up next, the king of the surf guitar, Dick Dale.
The first album that was ever done, Surfer's Choice, with a picture of me surfing on the cover. That was the first picture of anybody taken surfing and put on something for business. It was taken by John Severson, 7:30 in the morning under the pier in San Clemente. The album was called Surfer's Choice. We saved up our pennies and put it together because everybody wanted me to record something, so my dad and I just did it together. The song Mizzaloo that's on it is the one that inspired Quentin Tarantino to write Pulp Fiction. It's become like a national anthem. It's been on the Olympics every year, every day, Russia, everywhere. Even now with the Armada commercials, Nissans, the most expensive commercial, and number 5 with the Mountain Dew for the Super Bowl. It's becoming like an anthem. There's my music in Disney and Space Mountain all over the world. Well, what happened was, doing that, Leo, when he built that dual Showman, that and the mixture of the Stratocaster and the big strings and the speaker combination gave Dick Dale this powerful, fat sound. And it was exactly, you turn up the bass so it's full and bring up the treble so you can hear on the edge. How simple is that? Now everybody brings equalizers and all this other crap. I can't even understand that. All these stupid little levers that you got to push. I mean, the old days was where it was. And when I play on the stage, I play the same way. People are going, wow, where do you get that sound, man? The guitar player from The Cure said, Mr. Dale, that's the first time I've ever heard Speed play, and I could hear every note. And, I just fooled them all. I mean, they rated me number 31 in the top 100 greatest guitarists in the Rolling Stone. I can't even play the scale. I mean, without making a mistake. I can't read music. I mean, the top guys are people like Stevie Vai. These are the guys who are just the Eddie Van Halens, the Stevie Vai that studied every scale that there was to study.
I know, but you must recognize the fact that your tremendous style has put you at 31. I mean, you have a style and a way of playing that nobody else does.
It's a power. It's a very animalistic. I was raising lions and tigers for 30 years. Everything. I've had them all. Gorillas, apes, every type of creature that the Lord made. Over 40, 50 species. I wanted to be a vet, but I didn't have the heart to tell people their animals had died. It would just kill me. So I just took care of animals and raised them to preserve them from the poachers and stuff like that. When my elephant would scream when I'd come home, or my African lion would, my mountain lion would go, like that. I would imitate this on my guitar. Then I'd be surfing from sun up to sundown. All of a sudden, the same rumble and the roar that was sucking me in and taking me over the lip, taking me down and spitting me out and taking me back again. The sound, unless you've ever been sucked under a 15-foot wave and you're down and you're being nailed against coral and banging, you hear this stuff hitting you and your head's being nailed. These sounds, these growls, these roars, these are the things that I was just getting pissed off and emulating them on my guitar. Take that, like that. And I'd get in there. So it would be, I stick my finger in the wall of a wave and it would go and like that, and I get that sound. So it was a mixture of the roar of my lions and tigers and then the surf I mean, they could have called me Dick Dale, King of the Jungle. I mean, but because I was surfing, they called Dick Dale, King of the Surf Guitar. And I used to make fun of that. You know, I used to go and get one of those hats in the McDonald's, someplace, you know, those king hats, and walk out and go, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. And then I got really scolded by an agent, a big agent one day. He said, Dick Dale, he says, don't you go and put that title down. He said, there's only been 2 kings that has been actually acknowledged and laid in stone by the historians, and it's also by the White House. Dick Dale's the only one that his life story has been inducted into the Congressional Hall of Records. And Congressman Jerry Lewis went on the floor and said, Congress, sir, and they all voted, members of the Senate and everything else, to put Dick Dale's life story into the Congressional Hall of Records, into the White House for all time. And it's weird because my lucky number is 13. My son was born on the 13th. Everything is 13 in my life. Serial numbers of my airplanes, the street addresses I lived on, Mansour, my last name, 13th letter. I never knew anything about this until Jill brought it to my attention. I was inducted on the 13th into the Congressional Hall of Records, into the White House. Now, that's got to mean something. Well, at the end of that letter, it said, Dick Dale is truly the king of the surf guitar. So this agent, promoter, said, Dick Dale, there's only 2 people that they've ever recognized as king of something. That is Elvis, the king of rock and roll, and Dick Dale, the king of the surf guitar. And Elvis used to take me up and down Hollywood Boulevard in a Stutz Bearcat, and the cops would pull us over and they'd go, oh, it's you. And he'd have his shades on. They go, do you want a manager? You go, thank you very much. And he'd drive away. He's just a great, great person, big heart. And he was, and then even in the Kempo, in the martial arts has been my whole life. And that's why I've raised my son the same way. And Ed Parker from Hawaii. And I've gone through many, many, many styles through the world, but Ed Parker was very dear, and his family is very dear to me. And his kids would call me Uncle Dick. Well, Ed gave his Kempo sticker to Elvis on stage and me on stage. And we both wore it, and Elvis put it on his black flat top guitar, and I've always had mine on mine in homage to Mr. Parker. Well, sure, this is the title that is stuck. All the other guys wanted titles, but they didn't stick as true as historians would call them that. So I said, all right, I won't make fun of it no more. But it's haunted me in a way, because if we go and we do a show and we say King of the Surf Guitar, only the people who think of the surfy things will come, not the other people, for guitar lovers. And I've proven it by not saying King of the Surf Guitar, just say guitar legend. And I asked this man on the street, I went up to a black man with the promoter and I said, would you go see King of the Surf Guitar? And he said, no. And I said, why? He says, it ain't my bag, man. I said, would you go see a guitar legend, even if you never heard of him? Oh, I dig Guitar Man. It's just the way things are done. People, when we used to advertise Dick Dale, we used to say, I wanted to give the band a name. I mean, we could have just kept the Dick Dale, like Tom Jones or anybody else, Elvis Presley. But, I said, let's dress the band up in uniforms, So we did. And when they changed their jackets, I had the different color. And then I wore my color, they had their color. So if they wore blue, I read red. If I wore red, it was like that. Well, what happened was, when they'd advertise, they'd say, stop down the Riverside, National Guard Armory, and say, Dick Dale and the Deltones. All right. Sounds cool. Everybody went down to see Dick Dale and the Deltones. Now, 20 years go by, and I go, what's your name? And they say, Dick Dale. Dick who? No, then you ever heard Dick Dale and the Deltones? Oh, the Deltones! It's because the Deltones was the last thing that rang in their ears.
Once again, that was Dick Dale, and next up we're going to hear from Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys again, talking about California Girls.
The first song I recorded with the Beach Boys was California Girls, and I was called by Mike, and a few weeks earlier said, Brian, as you know, doesn't go on the road anymore, and Glenn Campbell's starting to work in his career. Who do you know? I called 10 people. I still at Columbia Records. And then I said, well, look, I can get down to New Orleans this weekend. It was April 9th, 1965. And it just started there. Then I came home, and Carl said, you got to come back out. And one thing led to another, and Brian said, we're making this new album. I'd love to see what your timbre would sound against the rest of the band. So I had like a sub lead an answer lead in California Girls, Trial by Fire, of course.
That was Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys talking about the song California Girls, which makes me flash back to my childhood because we listened to the Beach Boys all the time in the car as a kid. It was insane.
And I'm sure road trips to California.
Yeah,
that would make the playlist.
You just as you're rolling into San Diego, I'm from Phoenix, rolling into San Diego on I-8, and you just got to play it, and then you roll your eyes because your dad's in the front seat, and you're just like, oh, you're so embarrassing. So next we're going to hear from George Tomsco again, and he's going to be talking about a really cool story where his first recording session with the Fireballs, he gets to meet the man, the myth, the legend. Any guesses? You guys know because the sheet's in front of you.
Yeah. Well, I did the interview, so.
But do you remember? 3,000 later, it was
Buddy Holly, of course. That was really cool. I mean, I really love meeting people who met Buddy Holly. It's really kind of cool because it was a moment in each of their lives that they're very proud to talk about. So it's kind of fun to hear this from George.
I really wanted to be in the music business, but I didn't know how to get there from here. The closest I could get to the music business is when I turned on the radio and listened to it from Nashville or from Big D Jamboree, Springfield, Missouri, the Ozark Jubilee, just all those jubilees and Western things that were happening that were being broadcast on AM radio at the time. And Mom and Dad didn't have the money to really send me to college. And I really didn't want to go to college, but I did get a scholarship for good grades, which I had to work real hard at, but I did get some good grades. And I won a scholarship to New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, and you worked a half a day and went to school a half a day. So while I was there, I was playing a little demo that we had cut with the music band teacher in Raton, New Mexico, when the Fireballs were jamming and rehearsing. And I was playing that on a little record player, and one of the students came by and was leaning up against the door of my dorm room and listening, and then I didn't know who he was. And then when it was finished, he says, "Who's that?" I said, "Oh, that's our little band in Raton, the Fireballs." And he says, "You ought to go down and record at Norman Petty's studio in Clovis, New Mexico, where Buddy Holly and the Crickets record, and Roy Orbison and Buddy Knox." And I says, "Goodness gracious." I said, "Where's this?" He says, "My hometown, Clovis." And that weekend, I went home and I got on the telephone. I called the guys. I said, "Hey, there's a recording studio in Clovis, New Mexico." So I got on the telephone and I called down there, and Norma Jean was the secretary. She answered the phone, and I said, "We want to make a record. We're up here in Raton." She says, "Well, just a minute." She said, "I'll let you talk to Norman Petty." I said, "Oh, I don't know. Do I want to do that? I mean, this guy's the guy that recorded Buddy Holly and everything." And I said, "Okay." Well, he got on the phone and he said, "Well, can you send me a tape recording of the band?" And I said, "No, because we didn't have a tape recorder, and I didn't want to send one of those discs." And I said, I really fibbed to him. I said, "In a couple of weeks, we're going to be down there playing around that area." We didn't have any plans to do that. I just told him that. And he said, well, that's good. Maybe, I said, could we come by the studio and just audition live for you? Because I felt like once he heard us live, that he would like the band. I wanted to believe that, you know. And so we hung up the phone, and I called the guys and I says, man, we've got an audition on a Sunday in 2 weeks down there, because Norman said that he would audition us on a Sunday, but it would have to be after 2 o'clock, because he and Vi were church musicians. He played piano and played the organ, and Vi played the piano, and said he wouldn't audition anybody until after like 2 o'clock. So we made arrangements to be there on a Sunday afternoon. And the night before, I went back to school Monday morning after the weekend that I booked the thing with Norman and talked to him. I went back to school and started checking out of school and told the professors I was going into the music business. And we hadn't even had the audition yet, you know. But I was just that determined that that's what I wanted to do. And we had to find a job so we could earn the gas money to get down to Roy, New Mexico, and play the job, and then go on down to Clovis. So we found a little bar there in Roy, New Mexico, Rigoni's bar was, and I called down there, and they said, no, we don't have anybody in 2 weeks on Saturday night. And I said, well, how much do you pay bands for playing? They said, we don't pay him anything. Says, you know, we charge $1 a person, and you can have the money at the door, and we'll take what we sell in the bar, you know. Okay, so we did that, and we earned a couple $100 actually. A lot of people had come down because we had already established a little bit of a following. People knew about the band. So when they heard that we were going to be playing in Rigoni's Saturday night in 2 weeks, the word spread. Well, we had a good crowd, and we went on down to Clovis and got there Sunday morning, early in the morning, and checked into the motel, and was at the studio at a little bit after 2. I think Norman said, we'll audition you about 3 o'clock. And we were there at 3, and we started setting up and rehearsing and waiting for Norman to get there. And there was a couple of young men in the control room of the studio. We didn't know Norman. We didn't know anybody. It was all we knew was Norma Jean was the secretary. And so Norman, we kept rehearsing, and then I asked Norma Jean, I said, where's Norman Petty? You know, we kept playing and playing, and these two guys were working in the control room, and finally she said, Mr. Petty's in the other room. And I expected to see a guy with a white shirt, you know, and maybe kind of with the buttons pulled apart. I'm sorry I messed with the microphone, but with the buttons pulled apart, maybe smoking a cigar, and that was not the case at all. He was a very clean cut, very groomed young man, and so he come walking in, and he said, he said, I've been listening to you over the microphone. And the reason he did that was because he knew that we would get nervous, you know, when we knew that it was Norman Petty. So he had heard us without us knowing that he was listening. And that worked out pretty good. And then we played some more songs for him. He asked if we had written any songs. The question was this: do you have any original music? And I says, original music, what do you mean by that? And he said, have you written any songs? I said, yeah, we've got 2. And we had written 1 instrumental and 1 vocal. He said, did you play them? I said, yeah. He said, play them again. Okay. So we did. And he said, yeah. He says, I think those are pretty good songs. He said, so if you record, who's your publisher? I says, what's that? He said, well, if you're gonna have records out, or if you're going to record, a song needs to be published. So he says, well, we don't know anything about that. He said, well, he said, if we record you, would you care if I published your music? He says, I mean, here's the manager for Buddy Holly asking us if he can publish our music. And I says, whatever that means, yes. And so we wanted to record right then. And he said, no, I don't record on Sunday. And he said, we said, well, what about Monday, tomorrow? No, I've got a session with Buddy Holly and the Crickets Monday and Tuesday. So he said, why don't you guys go back to Raton, and we'll figure out another day, another time to get you back down here to record. I didn't want to leave town, and I told the guys, when he went out there, I said, this guy likes us, and we're here. Let's just stay in Clovis until we can record, which would be Wednesday. Well, 2 of the guys had regular jobs. Stan was supposed to check into college down in Las Cruces the next day, Monday, and I really, was all I wanted to do. Was I didn't want to mess that opportunity up. So 2 of the guys wound up calling back to Raton and saying, I'm not going to be to work Monday and Tuesday. Stan didn't call his folks. He just didn't show up for college. And so that's how we wound up doing our first session Wednesday of that week. I know it's a long story, but that's how the pieces fit together.
And what were the tunes?
Fireball and I Don't Know. I Don't Know was a vocal by Chuck Tharp, and he was our lead singer, and Fireball was an instrumental that I had written in school down there in New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology.
Now, did you see Buddy Holly at all?
We did. Buddy and the Crickets recorded Monday and Tuesday, then they left, and we got in there Wednesday.
That was George talking about meeting Buddy Holly, and that's a perfect way to plug a teaser, because coming in the next year or so, we're going to be hopefully releasing some more content about Buddy Holly, and we're really excited to put that package together for you guys.
Yeah, out of all of the 3,500 plus interviews that Dan has done, I think one of the most talked about topics is Buddy Holly. And when we put that together, it's going to be a lot of work, but it will really tie the whole collection together.
So make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that way it can hit your playlist? Phone?
Something?
Feed?
Whatever you listen on. And next up, we're going to hear from Bob Berryhill again, talking about the song Wipeout and actually playing a little bit of it.
We had played for about 3 months. We were a real experienced band. We're 15 years old, 3 guys 15, an old drummer of 17. We felt we were pretty good. And so when we came out to do the recording of Surfer Joe, our manager goes, boys, you need a second song for your 45. What's that? Well, you got to write something. We said, well, we've never written a song before. Well, hit it. So Ronnie Wilson, just out of the blue, starts playing the cadence that you've heard for the last 40-some years. And we go, well, we better put some chords to this thing and a melody because it will be an instrumental drum solo if we don't. So I said, you know what, guys? We've been playing in E, and we've been playing in A. Let's play in B. I thought I was really being an orchestral arranger at this point, right? I'm only 15. I go, all right. because I knew how to play double bar guitar chords, right? Because if I only could play this, right, but I thought, wow, I can really pull into it, right? And then the drum solo hits, right? And I'm just crashing chords, and everybody goes, wow, let's get going. Because the bass player had been playing this all the time on different songs that we used to play all the time. And so the lead guitar player, Jim Fuller, picked up this. Man, I mean, this is before heavy metal, right? Bam! I got my amp turned up in the room, just screaming these chords out. The guys in the sound room were going, Arnett, just going nuts. But I'm just crashing these chords all over the place, and everybody's getting into it. Ronnie just keeps on going, playing as hard and fast as he could play, right? And so after we've gotten the song pretty much developed, we rehearsed it. Well, we actually played it 3 times. And then at the end of it, the guy goes, okay, we got it. Okay, so we got it, and we said, what are you guys going to call that thing? We go, well, let's think of some names, because in those days, songs had introductions. They had laughing, they had car sounds, they had crashing this, whatever. And we thought, well, let's bust a board over a microphone like a busting surfboard, right? And so we said, let's give out a laugh like Goofy going over the falls, or Goofy going down the toboggan sled and Disney stuff, right? And so our manager picked up on that, and after we cracked the board, then he yells out this laugh. Wipe out! And we go, wow, that's cool. Put that on the front of the record, and 2 weeks later we have a 45 Wipeout by the Safaris. Safaris are Bob Berryhill, Pat Conley, Jim Fuller, and Ron Wilson. The Safaris. Cool. And there it is. And then the song is, in other words, music in that day, there were other instrumentals, Pipeline, Walk, Don't Run, all these other songs around. And my manager comes up to me and says, well, what do you want to do with this, guys? Well, Jim Fuller says, well, I want to sell my 25 copies, because we got 100 copies of Wipeout. And on the DFS label, Dale F. Smallin, our manager, right? Anyway, he gives me my 25, and I said, well, take this one, take it to a radio station. I don't want to just throw it myself. I want to see it on the radio, hear it. And so, if you remember the movie That Thing You Do, Tom Hanks, that's exactly how Wipeout started. It went out to San Bernardino and started playing on KFXM. I think that's what, KFXM out there in 98, an AM radio station, and in Fresno, KYNO. It starts playing out in these areas, and pretty soon the people in LA, this was somewhere around April or so of '63. Well, it gets into LA, and pretty soon it's getting played. It's the most requested song. All the boss jocks are loving it. Pretty soon it's #1 in Los Angeles. And I go, well, that's cool. And then it goes #2 on the top 100 Billboard cash box things. So you imagine we record this somewhere in January '63. It's #1 in LA in April. It's #2 in the United States in July of '63. Now, so we're on the top of the charts. And now we're touring with the Beach Boys, Roy Orbison, Paul and Paula, and April and Nino, all of the people that were flowing around in those days. We started hanging out with these people, going to Hollywood, playing on Sam Riddle's 9th Street West, and then various other TV shows, Chivalry, Shebang, Lloyd Thaxton, all the local shows. And suddenly, from basically June of '63 until December, we just kind of went all the local things. We played in all the concerts around. But music, as your question was, excuse me, music is starting to really rock out, because we're right at this point where it's before the Beatles. The Beatles are January of '64, February '64. So we had that whole year in there. But remember what happened in '63 in November, the John Kennedy assassination. So we had that whole time before that where the good life, the fun part, we were at the peak of it. We didn't know we were at the peak, but that's what it was, turned out to be, because the day the music died was basically when Kennedy was shot. So that changed the music scene right there. So we had a good 6-month run right there. All
right, that was Bob talking about recording Wipeout, which is probably a song almost everybody's heard in the surf music genre. And we're going to round out this topic hearing from Paul Johnston again. And he's going to talk about the differences between sounds on recording versus music at dances, which is kind of a cool topic.
If you went to the dances in 61 and 62 and through the surf music heyday, the music wasn't this sort of, if you just listen to the records that hit, you get the kind of a feeling it's kind of a white bread sort of sound, But it was tough. It was like kind of an R&B flavored, tough sort of sound that the early surf bands had. And it was like when you went to those dances, there was a whole atmosphere of it was a pretty cool thing.
Okay, so rounding out our next topic and our last main topic, we're going to be talking about some of the really cool new advances and trends that these surf musicians kind of pioneered, which is really cool. You learn a lot about technology and stage presence and a whole bunch of stuff. Yep.
And innovations. I really like this first one with Will Glover talking about the first wireless guitar, which is kind of fun.
So here's Will.
We were the first to ever have wireless guitars. Did you know that? Steve was kind of like this nerd genius guy. So what he did, but he ruined my guitar. Anyway, what he did, he ruined all of our guitars. He cut out this deal in the back. He cut out a deal in the back of our guitar, and he put this transmitter in it. And we would connect onto a radio station, and that radio station, we would pull it in, and that would grab our guitar. So if you ever see the pyramids, and you see these antennas, and I'm sure you have seen it. If you look in there, you'll see us with antennas on our amplifiers. That's because we're getting that signal from the antennas so that we were wireless. And we could, where other people would have to watch their chords when they made those turns and all that stuff, we didn't have to worry about that because we were wireless. And then we would run and jump right into the crowd, long before all of those other guys that do it now, long before they ever did that stuff. We were doing that at Pirates Cove at Disneyland. It was about this high off the ground. And the people would come there and they'd be dancing and doing everything, and all of a sudden Skip would be playing and Steve and I would just go and just jump right in the crowd. And there was a guy who was the manager. His name was Sonny. He would go nuts because he would think, lawsuit! But the kids would just go nuts. They would go crazy. And, they could just hardly wait for the pyramids to come back to see what crazy things they were going to do.
So how did Steve come up with the idea of the wireless? That's pretty clever.
I don't know. He was just this guy, He's just this genius guy.
So that was Will Glover talking about wireless guitars and being able to jump into the crowd, which must be exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Especially if you were the first one to do it. What if they didn't know to catch you?
Hope this works.
Well, here goes nothing.
So staying on the topic of advances in technology and trend setting, we're going to hear from Dick Dale again, talking about the first rock guitar to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show.
God bless my father. And then I'd go on and play. I was the first rock guitarist to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. When I went there to play, and then the guys wanted to go and say, let's go. After we get through playing, we'll go and have a breakfast, And it's 1 a.m. or something like that. And I go, you can't do that. You're going right back to the motel with me, and we're standing in the bed, and I try to sneak out, the window, while my father's sleeping, and, it was so funny. But God bless him. You know what? He got me to the point where I've been doing this since 1955. I'm 66 now. I've never had a drug in my body. I won't even put pain pills in my body. I hate those or anything. I never put alcohol in my body, became a drinker. And I don't smoke cigarettes. I haven't eaten red meat in about 25 years. And that's why I'm still kicking ass on stage. When I play, the world rocks because I make their ears bleed. So
I really enjoyed listening to Dick. He's such a great guy, and I just wanted to say that the day that we did the interview with him, he was living out in the desert at the time, and is it 39 Palms?
29.
29. I knew it was one of those. That is way out in the middle of nowhere, and he was so gracious. He spent as much time as I wanted to stay, which was like a month, and he was just great. And really what I gleaned from that is part of his personality is just very giving, and when listening to the music that he's been creating over the last 15 years that isn't always surf guitar, some of the ballads that he's written for his son, for example, are really touching and quite moving. So if you have the opportunity to delve in a little bit into the more recent recordings and compositions of Dick Dale, you may find a completely different side of him as I did. So with that being said, I think we're off to another web clip from Paul Johnston. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Paul's going to talk about the use of reverb on surf music, which is very interesting because I learned about reverb the introduction of reverb, when we did our Sun Records podcast, which if you haven't checked that one out, that was our first 2-part episode that we released during the debut of the podcast. So go back if you haven't listened to it. If you did listen to it, go back and listen again. So here's Paul.
Well, what's interesting is that right at about the time that surf music hit, or the identification was made, Fender invented the reverb somewhere in the middle of 1962, so that by the summer of 62, all these new bands that were starting up, this was actually kind of a coincidence, but it really played right into it, because all these new bands that were starting up glommed onto the reverb. Dick Dale started using the reverb, and the Bel Airs started using the reverb, and we didn't use it quite as heavily as Dick Dale did, which came to be a distinction between sort of the South Bay style of surf music, usually has less reverb, and the Orange County style that's modeled after Dick Dale was more reverb. But by and large, the reverb sound came to be identified with this new thing that was called surf music, and it fit because it sounded really wet and slippery. So it added all the more, and that was where surf music now kind of got its own regional sound to distinguish it from, rock instrumentals of the Ventures and Duane Eddy and all that. I mean, Duane Eddy had a big hollow sound, but there was a real distinct difference to the sound of the Fender reverb, where you could instantly recognize the difference between that and Duane Eddy. One of the reasons I kind of steered away from the reverb was because I was into melody and chord changes and a little more complexity of interplay between the guitars. That was the sound I was after, and I felt that the reverb kind of blurred that. It just sort of made the slurred
lazy players.
Yeah, the notes were kind of slurred together. Now, see, for Dick Dale, he had a particular attack, a particular style that really lent itself to, and a lot of the surf players picked up on that and pursued that, which is fine because I like it. I love the sound of Miser Lou. I mean, good grief, and Pipeline, the reverb in there. I mean, I love the reverb sound, but it's just for what I was doing. I preferred to have, I like a little bit of it, but I tried to keep it from getting too out of hand because I didn't want to lose the, the distinction of the notes that were happening.
So that kind of concludes our episode on surf music for this installment of the podcast. We're going to leave you with the words of Bruce Johnston from the Beach Boys, and it's kind of a theme I think that everyone in the collection touches on at some point during their interview, whether they're a musician or retailer or wholesaler or rep or whatever role they have in the music products industry. And that's what it's like to bring music to people, because that's the whole goal. So here's Bruce.
Well, of course, one of NAMM's themes is bringing music to people, and the Beach Boys have certainly done that to millions of people. And I just wonder, how have you put into words what it's like for you to bring music to people?
Yeah, it's really great. I didn't start at the beginning, but as I said, I was working at Columbia Records at the time. But I started when I was 22 in the band. And I've been there long enough to just still be in shock every night when I see someone my age with his grown children and their children singing the same songs. So all that is so relevant, and I got to be part of what the band dreamed up, and Mike and Brian and other co-writers that Brian had, like Tony Asher for Pet Sounds, but mainly Mike Love. I mean, he's like Brian. Here's Mike Love and Brian. Brian would be the guy who would be probably kind of shy, but kind of really great when you got to know him. And Mike would be the guy that would tell him what to wear so he looked cool in front of the girls with his lyrics. Mike's lyrics are awesome.
All right, guys, we'll see you in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.